Good morning, everyone. So glad to see you all with us this morning. Glad to see some new faces I hadn't seen in a while, and I think a couple of visitors with us. And good to have you all online as well. Welcome to 1111 downtown. I'm Tom McDermott, the pastor. I think I introduced myself at the Near South Side Incorporated meeting as the lead creative irritant. I think that's how I introduced myself, and then people came up afterwards. What was interesting was I went there with Brian Jolin because I just wanted to see what it was like. Part of the businesses that are near South, we're part of the Near South community. And then I made the mistake, I hope you don't think this is a mistake, but I made the mistake of saying, rather than trying to introduce who we are and explain what we are, which is a really difficult thing, as you all know, but rather than doing that, what I simply said was, I'm the lead creative irritant for the 1111 community, which meets down at the CTL, 512, etc. And then I said, and we have people who want to be volunteers. Let me know if you need somebody. So 4 groups approached me, so you'll be hearing from me in the near future because I volunteered you. So it's good to have you. Make sure you register your attendance. If you are with us for the first time, be sure to drop by Marty at the back there on the way out. We would love for you to have one of our band CDs. We have mugs and tumblers, but they're in my car, so that'll be next week. And then the other thing I would want you to know about is that if you remember, many of us, this never stays on my ear just snug in one place. We have Mike Brown's memorial services happening in Dallas. I hope some of y'all can come over. We'd hope that it would have been here locally, but it's going to be happening at Amplified Live, which is this side of Dallas, so it's not hard to get to right off of 35. You can find the directions there on the Facebook page, on Mike Brown's Facebook. And the memorial starts at 2. Brad, the band, and myself will be facilitating that. And then around 3 o'clock, there'll be a break, and then around 3 o'clock on into the early evening, 6 or 7 at least, there'll be a number of bands, just a huge assortment of bands playing in honor of Mike that Mike either played with or who Mike influenced in their music or just loved Mike and want to play some of the songs that he also loved to play. So it's going to be a beautiful experience. Hope you can join that. It may even be live streamed. If you go to that Facebook page, you might find a link there. They talked about that. So that's also happening. So this morning, we're in the 3rd week of Advent, right? So Advent is this liturgical season that the Methodist Church participates in, Presbyterian Church participates in, most mainline sort of Protestants participate in this idea of the beginning of the Christian year being in Advent, which is a weird time to begin the Christian year, because essentially it starts in darkness. And then follows up with Epiphany, and then on into eventually into Lent, and so on, Easter and beyond. But we start with this period of sort of darkness. I'm just going to hold it right here for now. It's not staying put. So we start in this period of darkness, and the story, which is, I think, fascinating, which is the Nativity Story, speaks to something more simply than the birth of the Savior of the world, which is the Christian myth that maybe many of us grew up with in our tradition orientation around Christianity. There's so much more that's there that Mr. Rogers tapped into, I think, when he addressed a crowd following this comedian. He was speaking at a conference, and he addressed this crowd. They were in a frenzy after this satirical, humorous comedian had them laughing and standing in ovation, and then Mr. Rogers was to come out and speak. And the MC was having a hard time getting him quiet when Mr. Rogers simply stepped up to the microphone and repeated twice. He said, "Who loved you into being? Who loved you into being?"
You're a mean one, Mr. Grinch. You really are a heel. You're as cuddly as a cactus. You're as charming as an eel, Mr. Grinch. You're a bad banana with a greasy black peel. You're a monster, Mr. Grinch. Your heart's an empty hole. brain is full of spiders. You've got garlic in your soul, Mr. Grinch. I wouldn't touch you with a 39.5-foot pole. You're a vile one, Mr. Grinch. You have termites in your smile. You have all the tender sweetness of a seasick crocodile, Mr. Grinch. Given the choice between the two of you, I'd take the seasick crocodile. You're a foul one, Mr. Grinch. You're a nasty, nasty skunk. Your heart is full of unwashed socks. Your soul is full of gunk, Mr. Grinch. The three words that best describe you are as follows, and I quote: stink, stank, stunk. You're a rotter, Mr. Grinch. You're the king of sinful sots. Your heart's a dead tomato, splotched with moldy purple spots, Mr. Grinch. Your soul is an appalling dump heap, overflowing with the most disgraceful assortment of deplorable rubbish imaginable, mangled up, entangled up now. Nauseate me, Mr. Grinch, with a nauseous super nos. You're a crooked turkey jockey, and you drive a crooked horse, Mr. Grinch. You're a three-decker sauerkraut and toadstool sandwich with arsenic sauce.
Man, it's got to get better from that, Brad. Wow. Well, it's time for us to light the worship candle. And the worship candle being lit is a reminder of the presence of the Holy One in our midst, and an invitation for all of us to walk in the light of love. So if you would, join me as we open our worship service. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving, it doesn't matter. Ours is not a caravan of despair. Come, even if you have broken your vows 1,000 times, come yet again.
Thank you, George Sutton. Mr. Pecan. 11:11, we need to stand and sing a Christmas carol, okay? Let's do this, man. What a groovy beat. Y'all know this one, right? Angels we have heard on high, sweetly singing o'er the plains, and the mountains hear reply, echoing their joyous strains. Hey, glory, hear that shout. funky with David. Take a second and offer one another a sign of peace, would you please? We're through being funky. We're going to be serious now. Elena's going to lead this one. Sing with us, would you please?
Love, hear my voice through the silence and the noise. Peace is welcome in, it's welcome in.
Verse 2.
Love, fill my heart, hold me close where I'm apart. Peace is welcome in, it's welcome in. Love, be my guide, even as I close my eyes. Love, be here now, be here now.
Sing another verse.
Love, sing my words so that everyone is heard. Love, be here now, be here now. Love is all around, it's all around.
For those of you gathered here and online with us, now is the time when we set aside the busyness and the clock ticking of our chronos time, and we realize that we also live in God's eternal kairos time. And we enter into kairos through quiet and stillness. So get comfortable and close your eyes if you like, and be aware of your breathing, for each breath is a gift of life. I will share a few thoughts that are helpful to me as I enter the quiet. They may or may not be for you. And then let us just sit quietly together for a few moments as friends. In the quiet, I can reclaim what is good and beautiful and true. In the quiet, I can lay aside the voices that do not bring life, that do not create life or sustain life. In the quiet, I can stay open to the possibility of healing, of hope, and renewal. I can seek the Spirit and wisdom and compassion. I can return to the light and find that love has been my home all along. In the name of the one in whom we live and move and have our being.
I saw the Buddha open up his eyes one Sunday morning. Said he's invited to a party full of Christ, and he must be going. Himself up with the groan, standing slowly, came down the steps of stone and asked me where to catch the next train to Jerusalem. In India, he sang with Hindus as they prayed by the Ganges when the dawn came. Near Arabia, he saw Muhammad on the train and asked if he would join them. Passing down those Tibetan towns, they talked for hours all about the truth and how it's discovered. Trading bits of news and stories from 3,000 years. Saying great how deep this party for Jesus. Then Muhammad said, hey Buddha, it's great to see you. Finding the place with the help of Abraham, waving from the doorway. They greeted faces from 1,000 holy lands, present day and all ages. Everybody talking loud, anticipating. Said how desperate the world it is changing, and somebody lit 2,000 candles, and the old toasted Jesus in a stable. Then Jesus said, hey, let's not be strangers. I saw the book opened up his eyes one Sunday morning.
Peter Mayer.
Thanks, man. Such a great job. Such beautiful music. I love that song by Peter Mayer, one of my favorite songs. And a fun one for this time of year, I think, also, as it speaks to what I'm going to be talking about this morning. This idea of who loved us, who loves us into being. And I'm going to ask you three important questions, that being the first one. So hang on to this. Remember these three important questions. That's the first one. Second one's coming in a minute. Before I get started, tell you a couple of quick jokes because they're relevant. They relate to this. Oh, before I even do that, thank you, Bronson. So nice to have such talented people in our community. Bronson and Margaret, of course. But not just because of that, because just when you least expect it, you're struggling with something, somebody pulls out of their pocket Scotch tape. That's so nice. And I don't know, do I see Kathleen Patterson? Yes, I see Kathleen back there. Kathleen, you and I were hiking up the mountains. You remember above Wicklow Hills in Ireland. And 2/3 the way up there, my boots, the sole falls off my boot. And I'm sitting there thinking, all right, well, this is rocky. This is going to be painful. And she stops and pulls out duct tape from her backpack. Because you know that's what you always take with you wherever you go. And so I just taped my shoe together. It was beautiful. It worked. Life is full of improvisational moments. All we have to do is just look and they're there, huh? It's fun. So here's a fun little joke. You know this one. A rabbi, a priest, a lawyer, and a blonde walk into a bar. And the bartender says, what, is this some kind of joke? Get it? Yes, right. So with that in mind, here's my Zen Cohen, Christian Cohen riddle, if you will, at the same joke. Frankenstein, robot from Lost in Space, the Grinch, the Tin Man, and Miranda Priestley walk into a bar. And the bartender says, who's looking for a heart? Hang on. So here is this part of the 2nd century story that we've been reading the last 3 weeks and that we always read this time of year. What happened to Jesus before his birth and then the birth and the nativity. It's one of these stories that is captured so much by our culture as much as it is by our faith and theologically. But it becomes this sort of, this iconic image that runs the risk, I think, of so many things in our life. We've talked about this before. When something becomes so solid, solidified, concretized in our reality that we hold it so literally that it loses its life and it becomes a static thing that we hold like a trinket in our pocket or like a flag that we wave or any other number of things that we cling to defiantly and then miss the dynamic quality that the story offers. So this morning I want to think about this story again from that mythic possibility of truth that is in all these ancient stories. This one comes from the 2nd century then. It's the Gospel of Matthew, and it's written in about 80 AD or so about 50 years after Jesus' death, and 10 years or so after the diaspora of the Jews spreading out throughout the land because Rome overthrows Jerusalem, destroys the temple, and the Jews are scattered. And so this story is then written to a Jewish community, and it comes from Matthew. This is the first chapter, 18. This is how the birth of Jesus took place then. When Mary, his mother, was engaged to Joseph before they were married, she became pregnant by the Holy Spirit. Joseph, her husband, was a righteous man. Because he didn't want to humiliate her, he decided to call off the engagement quietly. As he was thinking about this, though, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in his dream and said, "Joseph, son of David, don't be afraid to take Mary as your wife, because the child she carries was conceived by the Holy Spirit. She will give birth to a son, and you will call him Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins." Now, all of this took place so that what the Lord had spoken through the prophet would be fulfilled, and they will call him Emmanuel. So right there, the text tells you this story is related to an earlier story that happened hundreds and hundreds of years before, when Isaiah had written in chapter 7:14 that this one will come to save the world, and he will be called Emmanuel. So it's an echo back, right? We're connecting time, we're connecting characters to a lineage of narrative. And that's important too. The question, I think, for us then is kind of, what do we do as we think about this? Who loved us into being? Y'all remember Aesop, right? I really didn't think about this. Sometimes I forget to think about these things, like what's going on in the rest of the world. Aesop lived in the 7th century BC, 680, 650, around there BC. And he wrote these wonderful fables, these amazing fables, animals kind of representing humanity, human action. You remember this one about the lion and the mouse, right? And the mouse wakes up, he's been walking along and wakes up and realizes that he has stumbled onto a lion who is sleeping. And in her panic, the mouse jumps up and tries to run away, but somehow runs across the lion's nose, awakens the lion, who then roars and comes to life and sees the little mouse. The little mouse looks up and says, "If you spare my life, then I will come back sometime when you need me, and I will help you." And of course, the lion laughed at the very idea of him needing the help of a mouse. But regardless, he let her run free. Then as the story goes, sometime later, you could hear the lion roaring, crying out for help in the jungle, and the mouse heard it and came to where she heard that sound and saw the lion was tied up, had fallen into a snare, and began chewing away at the rope, gnawed the rope loose, one end of it enough for the lion to free himself. And Aesop says, a kindness never goes unmet. A kind action never goes unmet. What's interesting about that story has always intrigued me because I never saw it as an example of kindness or an example of the golden rule. I always saw it as an example of cleverness. The mouse outwitted the beast. This tiny little underdog overwhelmed the odds and outwitted the situation, problem solving, and got out of there. But that doesn't make any sense, does it? When you really think about it, because where in our lives have we ever faced this overwhelming disaster and outsmarted it? It rarely works that way. Something else was happening. And I think the real transformative part of this story is not the mouse at all, it's the lion. That's really the profound part of this story. Who loved you into being. The lion takes a risk and becomes something other than who he has always been seen. He actually risks being kind to the mouse. He actually risks abdicating his normal orientation toward others. He actually risks letting go of himself as center of the universe. Now you're going like, are you making all that out of this one little Aesop's fable? And I'm going like, well, yeah. You see what I'm saying, right? He actually takes himself out of the center of the universe and give center place to the mouse in that moment. He didn't know it, but he was following Jesus. The idea of the golden rule is fascinating to me because it's at the heart of all religious traditions, which is why I love the song that Brad and the band did. You can go online, you can find how each tradition has its own version of the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Jesus said, on this the law and the prophets, all the law and the prophets rest on that one idea. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. All of us probably think we practice that, right? I'm going to suggest that we would like to. If you're like me, it's something that I aspire to, and it's something that I rarely am able to do in truth. All the law and the prophets rest on this. You can find it in Buddhism, you can find it in Jainism, you can find it in Islam. All of them have a variation of this. In Judaism, it is do not do unto others as you would not have them do unto you. But it's the same idea across history, from as early as the 8th century BCE, this idea of the golden rule. When Plato wrote in the 3rd century BC, he said, be kind to all, for everyone is fighting battles. But I think kindness is a lot more than simply being nice to one another. I think there's a whole lot more to this idea of the golden rule than simply being nice. And that's what I want us to really think about when we think about who loved us into being. This last week, I finished the class that Linda and I started. Some of you all were in that class, Living the Questions. We finished the last session as we thought about what the future for progressive Christianity might look like. I remember quoting a quote from Walter Brueggemann. Several of us love Walter Brueggemann, theologian, Old Testament theologian, brilliant prophetic voice in our culture today, still alive and still writing. Walter Brueggemann said this. He said, of the things that matter most for the future of the church, these things must be in place if the church is to survive. And I think by what he meant by the church is Christianity in general, if it is to have vitality in the world. It's pretty much been his message all along. He said, first, this is the root of these three things are the root of the Judeo-Hebrew Christian tradition. So it's been there since the beginning of Judaism. The first rule is practice hospitality. But hospitality, you see, in the Old Testament wasn't just like inviting your friends over or being nice to people when they come in the room. Hospitality was including the stranger. Hospitality was inviting the enemy over for dinner. Hospitality was radical. It included everybody, even the folks that you were uncomfortable. In fact, again, it was this idea of stepping out of center and inviting others to be in the center place. We saw it in Jesus' life whenever the disciples would fight and wrestle over who got to sit at the head of the table. Hospitality is this radical practice of how we include one another. But it doesn't just happen in our spaces like homes or work or church. Hospitality is an ongoing, everyday, moment-by-moment reality that we step into wherever we are, right? We create the space we are in. We participate in that space. The second thing that was important was this idea of generosity. And generosity was more than simply just giving. Again, the idea of generosity was this idea of not attaching to who we are or our values, but giving the others a place of center. A generous spirit, a kindness that moves beyond simply just being nice to you, but literally puts you in my place and me in your place. So it's almost an empathetic kind of practice. The third thing he said is the hardest. Practice no vengeance. Who didn't get bitter this week? Who didn't experience a little bitterness? Who didn't think about somebody else when talking with somebody, a friend or so, and made a comment about somebody else that was just a little bit of a kind of a dig? You know, we all laugh about it. We all know, but that person's this way. How many of us don't do this on a daily basis? I love reading the Nextdoor app. Who doesn't love reading the Nextdoor app? It's better than news. The other day I read it, right, and as I was reading it, someone said, "Do you hear that gunfire?" right? I don't know, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, 1 o'clock in the morning. Do you hear that gunfire? Next thing you know, it's like, I didn't hear it, but I've got my gun just in case. And then someone else came on and says, I don't think that's right. We don't all need to be carrying guns. And then someone else says, well, I got my gun, bring it on. And then it was a lineup. It was kind of like, from that point on, it was like line up on the right, line up on the left. Who's going to hear something different? Right? And every now and then somebody tries to interject, why can't we all just be nice? And they both devour that person. They just jump on that person, right? This idea of no vengeance is so hard for us. This idea of practicing a kindness which looks at the other with the perspective of their humanity as much worth as my humanity. And it begins with a kind of forgiveness rather than vengeance. Now, I understand how difficult it is. One of the people in the class who is a legal consultant and a political analyst, she said, this is impossible. This is so hard. She says, I know what this means. And I said, what does that mean? And she said, it means this changes the way I am to see everything. It doesn't just mean how I act. It literally means it changes the way I am to see things. From the moment somebody pulls in front of me in the highway to what we watch on the Nextdoor app to what I see in the news to who I disapprove of, it changes how I see everything, and that's hard. And then someone else shouted out, raised a hand and lifted the reality, the question that yes, but there's a distinction we need to make between accountability and vengeance. Because certainly people should be accountable. And on the one hand, you couldn't argue with that. Isn't that true for kind of how our judicial system runs? Sort of. Most, maybe supposed to, maybe. But that changes how accountability is understood too. The one time Jesus really got angry with anybody in his disciple group, the one time he got angry wasn't when they didn't understand him, wasn't when they contradicted him, wasn't when they would ask questions of why are you doing this or why are you hanging out with those people. The one time he got angry was when Peter lifted a sword and struck one of the centurions for threatening to take him away. Jesus got angry. This idea of no vengeance is so hard for us because it literally takes us out of the center and out of control and puts others in that place. So that even if it feels wrong, and there's no question there's stuff that's wrong, we are still asked to see the humanity first. Can you fathom that? We are asked to see the humanity first. Pretty challenging, I think. Pretty hard. My mother was somebody who I would say, like I would say to you, there's a time when you just need to walk away. There really is a time when walking away can be the kindest thing you can do without diminishing the humanity of that you're walking away from, that person, that situation. I am grateful and will be grateful to this day that my mother walked away from my abusive father when she did. I think probably if it hadn't been for the children, she might have tried to figure out some way that she could have suffered through that relationship because of her own self-doubt and her own questions. But when it came to the children and the abuse that we were experiencing as well, I think she finally said, I got to walk away from this. And it took some time, as a person who grew up in an abusive relationship with his father, it took some time for me to come around and to empathize with who he was. And it took almost as much time for me to come around and realize the kindness that my mother had done in doing that. I regret really that I didn't tell her that more often. There are times you have to walk away. But there's never a time, this is the challenge, there's never a time when we are not asked or invited, or if you want to participate in the golden rule, we are not invited to see the humanity in everyone. Never a time. That should be our starting point. So when you look back at Jesus' life, this is truly what he exemplified in all that he was doing. When you think back about your own life and you ask this question, who loved you into being? I want to invite you just for a second to think about who that person was or who those people were. How did they love you into being? What was it that made you feel like you were loved into being? Valued, worthy, accepted, potential. Here's the second tough question. Who loves you into being today? Where do you experience, or have you stopped to think, where do we experience being loved into being today? Not just people, moments, experiences. Where do we really experience that? Because again, that is acknowledging, I think, this very core reality of what the Nativity Story is all about. That we are all interconnected in the love that is the ground of our being. This interconnectedness with all of life, with one another. That when we participate in that, we are participating in bringing about the kingdom of God. Who loves us? What loves us into being today? So Frankenstein, robot. Y'all remember the robot from Lost in Space? Yes. Thank you. Y'all are surely watching the new series of seasons, right? You know, the third season right now. Okay, so spoiler alert. Who loved the robot into being? Will Robinson, right? Yeah. But spoiler alert. There's something else that's going on in this story. So Robot, the Tin Man, the Grinch that the band sang on about. Miranda Priestley, you remember Miranda Priestley?
Oh, the Devil Wears Prada.
That's right. Just a little cliche there, a little trivia, yeah. So the bartender says, who here needs a heart? So think about it. In each of these stories, Frankenstein, what is most inhumane in us, most alienated, or even aggressive in us, or what we most fear, is often the other side of our deepest longing for connection. What we often most fear is often our deepest longing. It's the other side of our longing for connection, our feeling of being disconnected, and we project that, right? So Frankenstein, like so many human projections, seems more about the need for control. And so what he lacks is a sense of human connection. And who does he find it briefly in? But he finds it briefly in a child that befriends him for just a moment until the story reminds us that he's evil. And the villagers, again, define who he is rather than any humanity. Robot, Lost in Space, finds connection in his humanity and the compassion and the innocent kindness of Will Robinson. But then here's the spoiler alert. It becomes an important theme all the way through the narrative, even for, do you know who? Dr. Smith. She doesn't deserve it. Spoiler alert. The Grinch's cold outer bitterness is melted away to reveal his deeper longing. And while the song that Brad sang and the village sentiment, if you really were paying attention, regards him with insults and resentment that only furthers to confirm his inhumanity, his own opinion of himself, it is Cindy Lou who somehow manages to see his humanity, right? His longing for connection and her kindness redeems him. And while Oz never did give nothing to the Tin Man that he didn't already have, he hadn't accepted himself until Dorothy revealed it by seeing his own humanity already, by acting as if he saw that he always had what he wanted. It was that acting as if that changed him. So what are we to make of this story then of the Nativity? Well, I think just in conclusion that what we are asked to think about, to participate in with the Nativity, is this understanding that the mythic story, or however you see it, I'm sorry if I use the word myth and that throws some of you, however you see this story, the truth of this story is that in the incarnation of God in Jesus, the divinity present in humanity, is made manifest in Jesus' life, in his humility, in the simplicity of a birth, in the hope that that brings. So that the only real opportunity, the only real invitation for us is to simply not just accept Jesus, but to accept how he sees the world. Because once we begin to see the world as interconnected and as humane and see the humanity in everyone else, we begin to change the world. But you see what that means? That means we have to change ourselves. So the only way we change the world is in changing ourselves. It always comes back to that. Carry around the bitterness, carry around the vengeance, nothing changes. It only changes when we can move out of the center and allow somebody else, the other person, to be there. Approach it with curiosity, approach it with gentleness, walk away if it's dangerous, but you never lose the connection to humanity. I used to tell this story about Nasruddin. Y'all can kind of come on up if you want and get ready. I used to tell this story about Nasruddin, Hoja Nasruddin. Y'all remember this. He was looking for his key out in the flower bed. Sun was shining. Neighbors came. They started helping him look for his key. Nobody could find the key. They asked him, Nasruddin, where was the key when you last had it? He said it was inside. Then why aren't you looking inside? He says, because it's dark in there. There's more light out here. Friends, when we get scared, you know where we go? We go to the light. But it's not the light that we're invited to. That's the problem. That's the light of comfort. That's the light where it's familiar. That's the light that we're always leaning into, that we're always looking to run around in. The real light is what's waiting for us when we're willing to go into the darkness a bit. We're willing to step out of our comfort and into this vulnerable place. And once we do that, we begin to experience this transformation that I call the incarnate presence of God, the redemptive possibilities in that moment. Amen.
We'll do a benediction first, or we just got the final song? Oh, we do. Yeah. We just have the final song. I thought we had one more song coming. Do we have another song? Yeah.
Hello. So, before I do the benediction and we sing this wonderful song, Let the River Run and Bring the New Jerusalem, I wanted to ask you the third question, okay? Because that's the most important question, right? First one is who brought you into being, who loved you into being. The second one is what loves you moment by moment into being now. How do we find that? Where do we see that? What a great opportunity to actually look for it, right? Third question, who are you loving into being? What moments are you loving into being? So, let's stand. Next week, we have this wonderful celebration. I ain't going to preach, that's nice. We're just going to have music. We're going to sing. I'll tell a story. Jakey Cabe is going to be with us to do something fun, our actor and friend and member. And then I think we're going to have Hannah Kirby. We're keeping our fingers crossed. We'll have some other special guests, and we're going to have a wonderful time. I hope you can come. I hope you'll bring some more decorations. Thank you to Bronson. He brought Santa Claus up here. Beautiful Santa Claus. And so I'm going to invite you one more time and dare you, bring a decoration next week and create some festivity here and then take it home with you as we leave. And we'll celebrate next week. This is kind of our pre-Christmas kind of celebration because we don't have a Christmas Eve service. So, hope you see you next week and bring your friends and family as they come into town. Now, go in pieces. Our time is ended. Old ideas are being upended. New ideas are being mended. And as we travel, we unravel. But when we unravel together. And we travel this space aware of our connectedness to one another, dissolving some illusions, revealing some confusion, but in the process, connecting anew to the life that is around us. So, go in pieces.
Sing with us.